Over to you.
Thank you very much, Don, and welcome everybody, and thanks for sticking with us today. I'm going to get away from this because Don's already graciously subjected you to my face once, so we'll get away from there. And so let me start by, let's get this chat going. So what is this a picture of that we see on the screen here? And the second thing then is why is this a relevant image? And I realize there's not a lot of context there to begin with, but exactly. Okay, CA Siles won the Twitter derby here, or the chat derby, and recognize that it's a fractal. And indeed, and if you don't know fractals, it's a mathematical formulation that tends to map and has an interesting property that it tends to map out in numerical space, equation that ends up having this interesting property that while it appears to make patterns, at any point you cannot determine where it's likely to go next. And the reason I find this a relevant image is it represents to me, in a sense it represents chaos. It represents the increasing rate of change. We used to think of the world as a very predictable place, and the few things that didn't fit our patterns we sort of could explain away. But as things are moving faster and faster, we're finding we have more ambiguity, more challenges. Things are moving faster, with less predictable, changes happening at a more increasing rate. And what that means for our organizations is that we have to be more nimble. We have to be more agile. We have to move faster and more flexibly. And you can read the business pundits forever going on about what this takes. But for me, it means one particular thing, is that most of what L&D groups, learning and skills groups in organizations have been focused on optimal execution. Our training and our performance support is for that crystalline precision in what we do on training. And I want to suggest that this increasing change, as people are saying now, requires a complementary component, that our optimal execution has to be coupled with the fire of continual innovation. And the issue is, how do we do that in a predictable way? How do we support not just that optimal execution, but that continual innovation? Because I want to suggest we need to. So with that as preface, I want to, and yes, Pat, volatile, unpredictable, complex, ambiguous. So just a little bit about my background so that you understand the strange and twisted way I look at the world. I saw the connection between computers and learning as an undergraduate, and I ended up designing my own major, and that has been my career ever since. For far too many decades now. And what I do is I help organizations use technology in ways that align with how we think, work, and learn. And it's started with computers and learning, and it's led to things like games and mobile learning. But as I looked and worked with organizations, started recognizing that they were not doing learning as well as they should, and they weren't doing all they could and should be doing. And so that concerned me, and that led to both the book and the topic I want to talk about today. So let's start. Frank, what exactly is changing faster? What's driving the changes? Well, our technology is making things faster. We're able to produce information more. The rate of information we now learn the information created in a year is what used to take a millennia to generate in the past. And the ability to do 3D printing, for instance, is drastically reducing the time to prototype new products. And the tools we're getting are more powerful, so we can build software in much faster and easier ways. So our competition is getting more nimble. Information is changing faster. There's a large variety of elements that are producing that change, and there's plenty of places to go out and see people talking about the rate of change.
But by the way, Clark, we have a fantastic audience at Learning and Skills Group. We're going to have questions, answers, thoughts, observations, disagreements all the way through, which is great. We want more of it. You don't have to, I mean, it's great you've answered Frank's question. You don't have to stop every time to answer a question, because if you do, you may never actually reach the end of your presentation, because we have such a vocal bunch here. So my job is to ride shotgun and pick up on these questions.
Okay, I appreciate that. No, I usually can do a decent job of managing both, but
well, whatever works for you, whatever works.
Yep, we'll see. At any rate, so I just want to say, where are we at? What's the stage of the game right now? And I want to go through some data. So in 2010, for the Instructional Design Report, ASTD, now ATD, asked respondents whether they agreed with the following statement: my organization's instructional design efforts are effective in achieving organizational learning goals. How many agreed? So take your guess. How many do you think agreed with that statement? Karen, yes, few. 50%. 15%, Christopher. Few, 20%. And how many of you would agree? Let's thanks that. Less than 35% agreed with this statement. Now, isn't that what they're supposed to be doing? And yet they're not effective in achieving organizational goals. Way less than half. That's a concern. Let's do another one. Jay Cross and I asked 249 Chief Learning Officer respondents whether they agreed with this statement: our people are growing fast enough to keep up with the needs of business. How many agreed? 35, 20, 27.5. You're in the right ballpark. And what's sad is that, again, we're seeing your estimates quite low, and yet isn't this the role of the Chief Learning Officer? Isn't this the role of the L&D group, is to keep people growing fast enough to meet the needs of the business? And indeed, you're absolutely right, 23%. Less than a quarter of the CLOs believe that they were meeting essentially what their core role is. This is, in my mind, a serious indictment of the industry. And in fact, ASGD, in their Developing Results report, less than half of organizations have learning functions that excel at accomplishing the very things they exist to do. Isn't this a bit of the cobbler's children here? We are not able to do what we're supposed to be helping organizations do. And why is this? What is this? And Karen asked, is this hamstrung by the CTO? Really not. I mean, I do believe that the learning groups don't have a good enough relationship with IT, and many view, how many of you view the IT department as the enemy? And when I ask that question, in conferences and things, people, a lot of people raise their hands. But then I ask, how many of you get upset when the network's down? And again, everybody raises their hands, and that's their job. So to get along with IT, you need to not understand that their job is to keep network up. Now, a good IT department will also realize they have to adapt. So if you go in understanding what their goal is and still saying, yes, but we also need this capability, you're liable to have a better relationship. But I want to argue that this is effectively a big fail. We are not succeeding at what we could and should be doing, and there's a lot of reasons why. But I want to switch now to a slightly more positive stance and start talking about what we could and should be doing. In this diagram, tries to capture these are not exact numbers, but capture conceptually the way we use formal and informal learning methods. Formal learning methods, novices need. They don't know what they need to know, and they don't know why it's important, so they need the full wrapping of courses. But as they start doing the job, they become practitioners, and they now know what they need to know, and they know why it's important. They just need it. And the value of formal learning goes away. They need some coaching and mentoring and maybe some additional training. And, this varies in different areas. That person who's that great performer on the line, you promote them to manager, they may be an expert performer, but they're now a novice manager. But the value, as we move up that expertise chain, the value of formal learning moves away, and we have to start tapping into informal learning. And so the coaching and mentoring and interacting with others and getting performance support, just the answers we need when we need it, searching becomes important. And once they become experts, there is nobody who can be telling them what they need. They're the ones creating the new understanding that helps everybody else. That what they need are people to interact with, to spark that fire of continual innovation. So the reason I say learning and development doesn't do near what it could and should, it's not typically doing much for the practitioner and expert. It's still trying using courses as the only hammer in the toolbox, and that's just not sufficient. And so we need to go beyond, look at that fuller picture. And sadly, unfortunately, with formal learning, we tend not to be doing formal learning particularly well, hence the Serious E-Learning Manifesto, but we can. So I want to adopt one of your UK memes here and talk about minding the gap. And I think that there's some things about how businesses and people learn and work that we're not accounting for. Things have changed, our understanding has changed, and yet I don't think our methods are keeping up with that. And I want to talk about why that might be. So let me ask you, how many of you have ever seen a wrong decision made from higher up that had those decision makers checked with those below, they could have avoided? Have you folks, ever seen too many?
Never,
Yes.
says Nick, sarcasm. I like that one, yeah. Yeah, there's a certain amount of head nodding going on here, enthusiastic head nodding, Clark.
Yes. And there's a reason why that it used to be, we moved from individuals pretty much completely to hierarchical structures where one person, a leader, was sort of managing the practitioners, novices, and the experts. And they might have had connection with a few of those people, but they were doing the thinking for all of them. And the move we're seeing, what's being recognized now, is that the most effective structure for organizations is removing some of those hierarchical requirements, because it's hard to have one person do the thinking for everybody. The more we, whether you read Dan Pink's Drive or Dave Gray's The Connected Company, you start seeing a picture of organizations where instead we need to tap into the power of people. We need to give them, as Dan Pink says, purpose about why what they're doing is important and how it contributes, and then give them autonomy to pursue it. And instead, we support them acquiring the mastery to be able to do it, instead of being able to think that one person can think for a whole bunch of people. The room is smarter than the smartest person in the room if we manage the process right. Now, let me ask another question here. Have you ever searched for information inside the organization that you knew should be there, but you couldn't find it? Yeah. And, many times when I ask people in organizations, do you have portals? Oh, yes. We've got hundreds of them. If you've got hundreds of portals, no wonder you can't find anything. And yet there's a lot of stuff that goes on there. And the point is we need information. We're very bad at remembering stuff in our heads. We're really, we're good at pattern matching and meaning making. That's what our brains are good at. And it's really bad at remembering rote information and doing complex calculation. And the point here is that digital technology is the exact opposite. It's really bad at meaning making and pattern matching. It's really hard to get it to do that well. But it's really good at remembering rote information. I'll remember it perfectly, as long as the memory isn't wiped. And they can do complex calculations, anything we can program it to do. So from the point of view of a problem, we're far more formidable when we're augmented with just those capabilities we don't have. So together we have both our capabilities and the missing capabilities. So we've got a full suite of resources to apply to the problem. And that's what we could and should be doing, is helping people find the tools to meet the needs and using technology in effective ways. And this isn't just IT's job, because some of these tools aren't necessarily digital. It's the information itself, and structured in ways that we can process it and use it, and structured in ways that we can find it. And who better to be doing that than the people who understand? Now let me ask you another question. Have you ever taken a quiz where the alternatives to the right answer are so silly or obviously wrong that you didn't have to know anything to get the item correct? And when I ask this in rooms, I get the same response I'm seeing here: yes, yes, yes. Yeah, exactly, Michelle. Isn't that e-learning all over? And what a bloody waste of time. Excuse my language. Um, it's not so bad here in the U.S. I'm not trying to hurt anybody. It's just a waste. Why would you even bother then? What is happening there that is of any value? Nothing. And that's part of some of the ways in which our learning is just, we're asked to do it rapidly. We're given PowerPoints and PDFs and asked to turn to e-learning and expected to do it in a matter of a week or two. And the easiest thing to do is to put the information up and add a quiz and move on. But that's not conducive to learning. Learning happens through action and reflection. And when we're creating a learning experience, we should be designing action and guiding reflection to achieve the outcome we need. So what a learning session should largely look like is the person is put into a context where there's a story and given a decision, a situation precipitates them making a decision, and there's a right answer and consequences of that, and the wrong answers are challenging. They're hard to distinguish from the right answer unless you really know it. They tap into the common misconceptions people have. And once you are facing that decision, that's when going out and looking at a content resource, a concept presentation or example makes sense because now it's meaningful. And a series of practice like this is a better learning experience than an information dump and a knowledge test, because an information dump and a knowledge test is highly unlikely to lead to any meaningful change, ability change, skill shift. And what we should be doing with our learning is reserving it for when we do need a skill shift. If people have an attitude problem or people don't, have a knowledge problem, we're probably better off putting it in the world. So, our organizations and our resources and the way we learn, we need to understand and get our minds around this. We need a shift in our thinking to truly be able to get on top of this opportunity and to be really shifting those statistics so where we are helping the organization, where we are getting people in the ability to perform. So what I argue is learning and development needs to shift, and I don't know if that's the exact phrase used in the UK, but I want to shift from thinking about learning at all, really, to thinking about performance and development. The goal here is to shift to thinking about that optimal execution on the performance side, and the continual innovation comes from the development side, where we're developing people's ability to be innovative, but we're also developing the organization's ability to be innovative, and sometimes that's not so much changing people's skill sets, which is what training's about and learning interventions are about, as it is developing people, the culture, and facilitating communications and providing tools and developing people's ability to use the tools to be able to innovate. And one of the overarching principles that really I think can play a huge role here is what I call the least assistance principle. And let me suggest that it is not rude to ask the question, what's the least I can do for you? Because it may sound rude, but really people don't want all the help you can give them. They want just enough help to get back to the task. And it's a shift in thinking, and it's both a pragmatic response to our limited resources and large needs we're trying to address, but also on principle, it helps people get what they need done. But it's a shift in thinking where we're going to stop trying to do everything with the course, which properly done actually does take some resources to give them practice. We need to get the practice to where people, not just get it right, but to where they can't get it wrong. If they need to be able to get it right, let's do it. If they don't need to get it right all the time, why are we bothering? Let's just take chance. And so if we shift and start letting the network have the answer, or put the information in the world instead into the head and reserve putting it in the head, we're also doing the least we need to get, and that lets us spread our resources further. So let's talk first about the optimal execution, the crystalline precision of meeting people's needs. And I want to ask you a question here. What does it take to support optimal execution? And absolutely, Alistair. And thank you, Laura, for statistics. I love that towards maturity research your group does. So what do we do when we want to make sure people are able to execute those things we know they need to be able to execute? Granted things are changing, but certain things we have to make sure we're doing to the best of our ability, and that will, we'll develop at that over time. We'll come up with ways to improve it, but how do we do that?
I think in contrast to your previous questions, of course, Clark, this is something that requires a little bit more thinking and possibly a little bit more typing as well. So there's always a slight backlog before the answers come through. But one thing I'd say is we need to know what optimal execution actually is, don't we? We need to know what good looks like, and usually that comes by doing a bit of consultative investigation rather than accepting somebody's word for it, typically.
Well, consultative investigation and looking for actual things we're going to measure that says we're actually doing it. But yes, Don, exactly. We need to start by figuring out, not when somebody comes and tells us what needs to happen, because if they haven't done that same investigation you're talking about, we need to ask. And common language, collaborative learning, yes. But, typically, thanks, Donald. How do you understand optimal execution?
Well, I'm going to pass that one on to Clark. Clark, what do you mean by optimal execution?
I mean where we're anything we're manufacturing or services we're delivering, we are able to create them so that they work and operate. When we help people, our sales processes align with what we know about how to get the best long-term relationship with the customer, maybe solution selling. We have our processes for sales. We have our marketing is effective. We measure it. We check it. Our customer service is we respond to people in ways that, when they're upset, we calm them down. We meet their needs. We help them in the most effective way. We don't let them fall through the cracks. All of the ultimately, it's creating a very effective in delivering a very effective customer experience. So to me, the things we do need, sometimes people get upset. They think we're talking about getting rid of training. No, what we want to do is make sure, to me, optimal execution requires two things: good performance support, the right tools to hand, and then we are prepared. We have the skills we need to have. And there is a role for formal learning there, for training events, for learning, but they're going to need to be changed so they're not information dump, but they're contextualized, they are meaningful practice, they are, well, in fact, so let's go on. I mentioned the Serious eLearning Manifesto, and the four of us here, if you don't know, you should know Michael Allen, Julie Dirksen. Michael Allen's been, a leader in e-learning quality for decades, really. Julie Dirksen's book, Designed for How People Learn, is a fabulous resource. Will Thalheimer's been one of our best proponents of taking what the research says about how people learn and translating that into meaningful learning design prescriptions. And we got fed up with the state of e-learning, and finally, the four of us totally separately, independently, came together. We were wandering on the floor together at an expo hall and got fed up with the state of the e-learning industry and wondered what we could do, and we finally decided we'd put together a manifesto. And there's 8 sort of values that we think are just fundamentally different. What we're seeing is fundamentally different from what we need to be seeing. And similarly, 22 supporting principles that we'd like you to, and thanks, Don, for putting the URL in there. And, don't run away now, but cue it to look at it and see. And some people say, oh, well, we know this stuff. Well, if I look at the e-learning out there, so many of you agreed that most of the e-learning was just this, silly quizzes. That's not good e-learning, and so we think there is a need for the change. I also want to talk a little bit about how people perform in the world. In the world, there's people act in the world when they can, when they're within their range, but increasingly we're seeing situations where there's a breakdown. And then we have to repair, and ideally we reflect, go back, and I use the example of, driving home. You typically have a route that you take to commute home, whether it's driving or on public transit. You can do that and have a conversation, and you'll do it just fine unless there's some breakdown. So if your path is blocked, then suddenly you have to go, oh, what's an alternate way to get home? And, if it's temporary, you might just take that one other path. But if it's going to be blocked for a month, you might actually go, okay, I'll try this way today and that way tomorrow, and then I'll decide which one I'm going to do going forward. And that's, how we really perform in the world. And the reason to think about this is when we want to support people in doing the tasks they have to do, they have an information need at the breakdown. If there's a detour sign that says go this way to get around it, boom, you don't have to really think. Somebody's put information in the world. If there isn't that support, then we go into problem solving, and we need different types of support. And if we find the answer, ideally we update the information so nobody else has to find that same answer. So it works out like this. When you want to take the perspective of supporting people, you might connect them with people. Somebody who has the answer, just say, here, call this person if you have this problem, and they'll help you sort it out. Information resource. When the people is when you pop up what here in the U.S. we call the prairie dog phenomenon, where they pop up over the cubicle and say, hey, Joe, how do you do this? And Joe may not be the right person, so we might want to connect him with the right person. Or an information resource. This is when people Google things or look it up on a network if they can find it and it's been structured properly. Or they might take a course. If they recognize they're going to face this issue again and again, they might take a course. If they find the answer, boom, they can go back to work. That's great. We want that to happen. That's the fastest thing. Now, if it's too new or too unique a situation, then they go into problem solving. And this is where we shift from optimal execution to continual innovation, because problem solving is a form of learning. You don't know the answer when you start, but it's very different than formal learning. This is when we might need models and data and people. But now they're different people. They're not the person with the answer. You would have found them at the first step. Here they are people who can help you solve the problem. They might have complementary skills. They might be, deep in statistics and able to help you look for patterns in the data. They might be process facilitators or experts on this particular process that you are going to try to use as your problem-solving thing. So let's go on and talk about the fire of continual innovation. And let me ask a complementary question. What does it take to support continual innovation? And again, as Don said, this is a complex question, probably starting with the definition of innovation. And if you go to Wikipedia and look it up, as I have, they'll want to separate it out from invention. Creativity is coming up with an idea, an invention, but actually innovation isn't really documented until it's gone out and has demonstrably been a better way to do it. So a better product, a better process, whatever it is, that's the innovation. And how do you support coming up with the new ideas? How do you support getting them and testing them? Whiskey, yes. Social lubricant is a great facilitator, Nick. Less bureaucracy. Laura is absolutely right. It's about culture. And Mike, creative space. It's got to be a place where that can happen. And a process for institutionalizing that innovation. Well, absolutely. It's not just coming up with the ideas, and you do need to have those ideas, and you need a way to test them. But then you need a way, and companies have fallen down on this, on the ability to revise their process or put in this new product and bring it successfully to market. There's a whole bunch of stuff on the development side of that. Largely, and I think L&D can facilitate that. One of the things important about innovation to recognize, however, is that there's one myth that it's the individual goes away and comes up with the innovation. And you can read either Keith Sawyer's Group Genius or Stephen Berlin Johnson's Where Good Ideas Come From and find out that indeed good ideas come from people working together over time, and that creative friction. It takes people working together, collaborating, developing on each other's ideas, and there's a number of other elements that it does take.
Can I just jump in there? The cultural point, this is very important. I think Julian Staddon's raised an interesting point as well, and the same truth for Michelle. They're saying culture is terribly important, not punishing failure. And Michelle says accepting evolution. I think you can't have that group collaboration and people sharing and sparking ideas of each other if there's any sort of culture of sarcasm, putting down ideas or putting down shutting the door on something before it's had time to at least be assessed. And you only need to do that a couple of times to make people really start to not bother putting ideas forward. So if innovation is going to end in action, it has to start with an idea, and you don't get the ideas if people aren't happy to share it and feel comfortable about it. Sorry, I jumped in there because I feel very passionately about that.
Well, I couldn't agree more, and we were getting to that later. You guys have jumped ahead in my presentation, but that's okay. It's fun, and in fact, I took out the complex diagram because I didn't want to talk all the way through that, but it's been very clear that there are certain factors. It's Garvin and Edmondson and Gino did a HBR report in 2008, Harvard Business Review, where they talked about what it takes to be a learning organization, and really, and learning in the sense that able to do innovation. And they identified 4 core sort of cultural elements like you're discussing that are, first of all, appreciating diversity. It really helps to have people who are different than you when you're trying to do this together, who think differently than you, who come up with complementary skills, but also just different ways of looking at the world. And if you manage that process right, the second thing is openness to new ideas. If you have a company or a culture that says, that's not how we do it here, that's not an open to new ideas type of mindset. A third element is what they call psychological safety, and I joke about here in the U.S. if you've heard about the Miranda Law, where and you don't want this in an organization where anything you say can and will be held against you. Is exactly a type of culture where you say it and people will, pillory you on it, as you were suggesting, Don, and a variety of other things. It has to be safe to share your ideas, and they will be listened to and considered. And it's okay to put out bad ideas even, and it's even okay to make mistakes. Is really important, as just not stupid mistakes and not the same mistakes. I love this story I heard at a small gathering where this company rang a bell, not when the mistake was made, but when the lesson was learned. And they share the lesson. And that's really important because then everybody knows not to do that again. But then it's okay to make the mistake, and yet you don't want to celebrate failure, but you celebrate the lesson learned. And the final one of those 4 is time for reflection. And too many people often think, we don't have time for that, we've got these deadlines to meet. And yet it turns out people are more productive if they take that time for reflection out of the whole same total hours, not added on, but take it away from the time you spend doing the work, a fraction, but some time for reflection. You actually are more productive in that lesser time than you would be if you spend all that time working. And so we need these elements. Nigel asked an interesting question here, continuous improvement versus continual innovation. Well, they're related, but improvement tends to be tuning the way you're doing things now, and innovation is doing things in a new way that's fundamentally different, and you shouldn't make that change until it is also better. It may only make, a delta in the quality, and you have to decide, if we just improve this process, the existing process this way, are we going to get a better improvement than shifting to this total new process? But there are times when shifting to that totally new process is a fundamentally better way to go, and that's the difference between improvement and innovation, in my mind. And this is a model we came up with at the Internet Time Alliance called the Coherent organization, and it started with work by Harold Jarkey. When we're solving problems, we work in teams. We should be working in teams because we'll get a better output if we manage the process right. And those team members should be coming from different communities of practice. Some of them may be coming from the same one, but we should be trying to get some other people in there to do the work. And those teams are drawing on what happens at the communities of practice. And as they work and develop their understanding to solve these problems, they should be bringing any learnings back to those communities of practice. Now, those communities of practice should also, and realize there's a firewall happening halfway through the community of practice, because half of your community of practice may be within your organization, but the other half, or at least half or more, is outside the organization. You want to be having that connection. And if you block communication through the firewall, you're cutting off essentially half your brain. But then the community's practice should be looking out to the social networks for other ideas, lateral input, innovations, but also related fields. in learning design, we should be looking at graphic design and software engineering and interface design in particular is a really powerful field that has similarities that we should be leveraging. And similarly, we should be sharing what we're doing in our community's practice as much as we can that's not proprietary out to the social network as a whole so other people can see what we're doing, what we think are good ideas. And this is the way we get innovation, by having this flow of information that can happen in that culture, as Donna suggested, where it's free. And there are lots of things we can be doing. So at that information need, we can be creating directories of people with answers and directories of people's skills. In the book, Jane Bozarth had a case study where somebody came, their problem was their people were making bad hiring decisions, and then they were also not effectively working with their people when difficult issues were coming up. And rather than create a training course, they created a better onboarding process, a better hiring process, and they created directories of mentors who were experts in each of these particular different things that they do with people, dealing with bad behavior at the workplace, dealing with people who had issues. And so instead of having a course, what you did when you had a problem was you found a mentor who could help you on this particular issue. We can, so the roles that L&D can take, curation. A social media company here in the Bay Area, the leader of their L&D group says, I will not create a course on anything that's not about our culture. If they need help with X, Y, or Z, I'm going to find them a book about it or point them to a good video or whatever it is. I'm curating resources for them. I'm not going to take my time to make a course on it because other people can create courses. I'll just buy the course I need. I'm going to save my resources for what's core to our business. And so they're creating. And they will design courses, but they'll design specific courses, and they'll design information resources and job aids, and who better to be doing that? But there's also facilitation. So we can be facilitating the ability of people to interact. Don't assume, even if you create a culture where it's safe to share, that people are good at working and playing together. You'll get the person who answers questions in such a horrible way and such a snotty way that nobody's actually going to listen to them and hates them. They could use coaching on how to be a little bit better on providing help. And some people don't know how to ask for help well. And again, there's lots of roles of facilitating, communicating and facilitating people's ability to do good searches, facilitating people's ability to do research and to apply problem-solving processes. There are lots of roles here, lots of opportunities to not just support that optimal execution, but to support that continual innovation. And these are the opportunities we have, and I want to suggest the roles we should be looking to take on, because if we want to be facilitating the overall organizational success, we need to do these things as well as offering courses. We need to be designing performance support. We need to be facilitating people's ability to work and play well together. Because if we do, we're shifting. I don't know how many of you have seen this. I suspect most of you that the L&D group, the Learning and Skills group, tend to be the first people cut. They tend to be viewed as a cost center. They can tend to be viewed as, well, a thing that's nice to have but not necessary. And yet I want to suggest that if we start being core responsible for organizational optimization, for more effectively leveraging what the organization is doing and making it more successful, we're going to be as pervasive. I think we should be as pervasive as IT, interlocked throughout the whole organization, making it more effective. And this was where I was going to talk about the culture. It's not good enough with a network. If you build it, they will come. That's just not the case, because there have been instances where people have put in a social network and nobody contributed because it wasn't safe to share. But there's other reasons. People won't go to a network until it's offering them value. And I don't, it's an ongoing process until communities of practice come up to critical mass. Once they get to critical mass, they're self-improving, they're self-correcting, people always worry, oh my gosh, what if somebody says something wrong? Well, a vibrant community practice will ensure that doesn't happen. They will not only fix it, but they'll educate everybody about why that's wrong. But it doesn't happen magically overnight. It takes deliberate effort to get it up and get it going. And I talk about, I use an agricultural metaphor. You need to seed it first, and that includes getting some thought leaders to start contributing there, offering value and adding things and curating information into it. And then it takes feeding, and that's, again, putting new ideas in there and going around and getting people to contribute and making sure that people who ask questions get their questions answered. And then it takes weeding. When there are those ineffective and inappropriate behaviors, you need to take those and address those. Maybe talk to that person offline or send them a message, say, let's talk about how you interact. But once you do that, you seed and feed and weed, then you can breed. You can carry that success of that community practice to other communities of practice and other networks. And by the way, that means you have to model it as well. And the leaders, this is an organizational change. So you need to treat it as such and have a vision. And some other elements on that success of the learning organization are leadership that not just supports it, but actively models it. They need to be sharing. And Jane Bothar's come out with a new book about Work Out Loud that helps tap into this, and Harold Jarkey is another one, has been talking about show your work, work out loud. These are really important. Actually, I think that's Jane's book is show your work, not work out loud. But the principle is the same. Start making what you're doing obvious, and you should be doing that as well in experimenting. So let me talk about, look down to the foundations about putting this together. And I want you to start trying to meet your organization's need by having the network, the social, the e-community, be the place where hopefully people can get the answers. Because as things change and become more ambiguous, not everything is going to be worth trying to create an answer for them, trying to create performance support, let alone a full course. If it can be met by the network, maybe it should, because that's going to be the freshest, most viable response. And you should reserve those resources to where it's either going to be persistent enough or enough people are going to touch it that it's worth the investment. You need to start evaluating that. So then when the information can be in the world, whether it's a checklist or a job aid, and if you haven't read Atul Gawande's The Checklist Manifesto, I can't encourage you enough. He's a fabulous writer, tells a fabulous story, and a really important one for us, where with a simple checklist in the developing world for medical facilities where the survival rate was only about 20% for, sort of surgery type of things, he switched that around to a survival rate about 80% with just a checklist. Now, he didn't just create it and it was good. He talks about the process of testing it and refining it and finding out the exact wording that needed to be. But once he did, just this checklist created a huge impact. And that's the result of realizing that some stuff isn't well done in our heads and is better off in the world. And try and do that when you can. People can't remember 500 different products in your product line. They need to be able to look it up when they need it. And they need, instead, conceptual models. And then when we do need formal learning, let's do it right, please. Underpinning that is an infrastructure. And I don't think there's one all-singing, all-dancing technology tool that you can put in place to do it. And, I have nothing wrong with having an LMS. But I think that bolting on a social network and portals onto those may not be the best strategy. I think it arguably is more effective to have the best of breed cobbled together underneath. Now, you may be in a situation, you're a small company, you can't have IT being that flexible, and then that may be your best solution, is to have some tool that can do the formal learning and the portal of job aids and support a social network. But mostly I'm going to suggest building in best of breeds, and the ability to swap out when a better tool comes available is a better strategy. And that brings us to strategy as the second underpinning foundation. It's not just bringing these elements together. You've got to figure out where you are now and have a picture of where you want to be, and then take steps that take you there systematically. but it also is going to start talking about measuring not just our efficiency and how much it costs us to have a bum in a seat for an hour, but instead, what are we moving a needle on? Are we increasing sales, decreasing time to sales? Are we increasing customer satisfaction? Are we decreasing time to solve their problems? Are we increasing, customer satisfaction in their total customer experience? And as was pointed out robustly by Don and a number of others in the chat, the culture. And part of your strategy has to be getting the culture there, because culture eats strategy for breakfast, as famously has been said. So this is the direction we need to and should be going. And the bigger picture that I want L&D to start adopting, this is the revolution we need to have. And so looking at these elements and sort of for each category of principle and approach as a shorthand way to start thinking about getting it. For your culture, think about empowering people to be able to contribute and get the best from them. An approach is experimentation. At two levels, L&D needs to be experimenting with ways to get culture right. And culture change is hard, but it's not impossible. And it's really, really important. I'm just about to start reading Change the Culture, Change the Game. And I've also got Scaling Excellence in my reading queue. But you have to be experimenting, and the organization needs to become tolerant of experimentation. You've got to have a budget for doing small experiments and looking at the results and learning from them and being willing to fail. Formal learning, you should only be doing it when you need to, largely for only your own proprietary stuff. When you do, make it meaningful in two ways, meaningful to the organization and meaningful to the learner. Performance support should be used when justifiable, and when you're doing look to the least assistance principle as both an overarching principle and specifically in performance support. Don't try and cram everything in there. Just figure out what's the smallest, the least I can do to get them back to working. And a really good principle comes from mobile learning, by the way, and yet really maps back to everything we're doing. Social should be the default, and we should be thinking about facilitation of the social network. Don't assume people know how to work independently, looking for their own answers, personal knowledge mastery. That should be facilitated, and then working and playing well together should also be facilitated. Strategy is really, my first strategic element is metrics. Start measuring what you're doing and looking at your impact on the organization. This isn't going to be easy. This means breaking down the silos and going over and talking to the business owners, the business units, and looking at their measures. You're going to have to sell them on this, but it's critical to the organization that you do this. And look for your effect first. Worry about efficiency after you're having an impact on those business metrics. Don't worry about your efficiency and benchmark yourself against every other organization and how much it costs you to deliver it. If you are doing that but have no idea whether you're impacting the business, in my mind, you're on a path to extinction. What Don's lovely training ghetto picture documents. And finally, in infrastructure, and I haven't talked much about this, but below cobbling those together, there's so much inefficiency in how we deal with content. And recently I attended the Intelligent Content Conference and wrote it up for eLearnMag. But you look at what the big boys are doing, the web marketers, where they have content granular down there, and they bring it together on the fly as you need it. You look at something like Amazon and those recommendations, there's nobody pulling those together for you. Back there looking at you and figuring out what to give you. It's all done by rules and systems. And if you imagine what we could do, if we semantically tagged our content and had it very well described and articulated, that we could start pulling it up by rule and start bringing just the right thing to just the right person in just the right way at just the right time, all the right stuff, as Wayne Hodgins used to term it. Both Chad Udell in his book Learning Everywhere and Ruben Tosman in his book Learning on Demand talk about this next generation of possible experiences. And if that's really the ultimate goal in my mind, is this performance ecosystem where the person is focused on their task and all their tools are to hand. And that's where we want to go. So that's the revolution I think we need to have. And frankly, I hope you're going to join me. I hope you'll rally around the flag and join on board and make the change. So,
Wow, that's great. You're too nice, though. You can't storm the barricades by saying, I hope you join with me. You have to shout and say, join with me, comrades, and we'll storm the barricades of inefficiency towards a better learning future. Then we answer. Nick Emmett cries freedom in the chat area. I think that's fantastic. Great presentation, Clark. We've got a little bit of time. There's going to be lots of questions coming in. Karen has asked us for a Les Mis song, not from me, Karen. I'm sure you'd do a great job. In fact, I know you would. Frank asked a question, Clark. Can you be more precise about exactly when formal learning is needed and when it isn't needed? So when would you say, yeah, formal's a good idea? A couple of examples or just one example? And while you do that, I'm going to put in the URL for revolutionizelnd.com into the text chat.
Right. And by the way, most thoughts before they appear in books and articles and webinars show up on my blog. Actually, my answer to Frank really starts with when you need formal learning is when you need a significant skill shift. So when people need to be able to do things differently, make better decisions than they're making now, is when you need formal learning. One of the game designers is Sid Meier. He wrote the game Civilization, the whole Civilization series, Pirates, and game designers look up to him. He once said, a good game is a series of interesting decisions. And that really catalyzed my thinking about using games for learning. I'd known this was important, but I hadn't had a way to describe it. And yet the way he said that helped me, because good formal learning is a series of important decisions. Put people in practice where they're making decisions. And because there are times when you need to know stuff cold, just rote facts like vocabulary. In the medical field, you don't want people mistakenly talking about the knee when they need to talk about the elbow is actually what needs to be, operated on. There are times when you need it, but really what's going to make a difference to the organization is people's ability to make better decisions. So if they're making bad decisions, that's when you might need a formal learning case. For instance, one course did was for an organization that was trying to get people to use this new process with their customers to come in and run this sort of business analysis that they'd sourced from MIT, and they wanted to get their people able to go in and work with customers and make decisions about who to talk to and then how to gather the data. And that was all about making better decisions. So that was when we needed a course. And I hope that addressed it, Frank.
It's good. I think it's always a slight question of it depends, but I think there are usually some pointers such as you've got to master something new, and it requires in particular.
I see Laura's asked a question. Many of us share the vision. What do you think is holding us back?
And that question was also asked by Andrew, effectively saying, look, we've been shouting for a while. Are we just an echo chamber? How do we get out and have some actual impact in this?
Well, there's a whole, it's sort of like trying to make education change in schools. There's a multiple factors that are holding us back. Executives went to school and they know and they equate that to learning, so they think courses are okay. Business units don't want, training. There are times when they'll just ask for a course. Give me a course to do this. Here's the problem, and they aren't really looking at the problem deeply. Frankly, the industry is, businesses will align with what they perceive, what the audience wants. And so there are selling tools that make it easy to take content and add a quiz and put it down and call it learning. And so there's complex factors. I think the most important thing is to start, so I think what's holding us back largely is our ability to think. Some of us are saying this, but a lot of people aren't. And there's lots of barriers. It's hard to go up and start talking to executives about changing the way you're doing things and trying to make it important, and yet that's what has to happen. The awareness has to raise throughout the organization. And I think the organization is recognizing the need. and they need the learning and development group to step up and the executives may not want to make the time, but you have to force it.
Can I suggest something? I mean, Nick says here, businesses that don't change will eventually be unable to respond, which is my area of comfortable extinction on my grid where I've got the training ghetto. And Michelle points out what's holding us back is the L&D professionals ourselves. We want to change, we need to want to change. I think that's true. I would suggest there are two things we need here. Firstly, we need to accept that not everybody is doing everything perfectly. But I think there are some people who are doing some things very well. And if we can look at great practice and honor and celebrate great practice where it's taking place, then we can get an idea of what it looks like if we fit all of those together and adapt it for our own culture. The real thing that's holding us back, I think, is we may want to change, at least those of us who do want to are ready for the change, but don't know where to go. And I think having a clear set of examples of what great practice looks like in different areas would really stimulate people to say, I know now what to do to take the next step. And actually, that's one of the things I'm really focused on for the next 12 months is try to find good practice other people can look at and say, yeah, I'm going to do a bit of that my way in my organization. Sorry, I didn't mean to hijack your presentation, Clark.
No, that's fine. And it's good to have that lateral input. I have to practice what I preach, right? And say, let's get diverse inputs. They're coming from the chat and from you. There are 5 case studies in the book. So Tulser's a consulting firm in the Netherlands, and they took a specific instance of an organization that had needed changes and took a different approach than training. And Mark Britz at SMS has worked on, was tasked with creating a corporate university, and instead what he's trying to set up is an enterprise social network. Allison set a community practice in place for just the L&D group, for all the different L&D groups within Intel. I mentioned the Jane Bozar's example, and what Charles Jennings did at Reuters in streamlining and the whole learning practice and shifting the thinking to 70-20-10. These are all examples that already exist. I think the work that Laura Overton is doing at the Towards Maturity gives you some good principles, and I suspect she's got a few examples of people that are beginning to start this change. And some of the work that the Change Agents Worldwide, admittedly I'm associated with them a bit, are all places that are looking to try and promote and help organizations make this change and talking about examples that are coming out. So I absolutely agree, good examples, but you have to, so I agree examples are critical, but you also have to have the frameworks, the models, so you can talk knowledgeably about it.
That's true, that's true. Otherwise, it's just a bunch of random stuff. Absolutely.
Right, you need the frameworks to extract, and I don't like best practices.
No, it doesn't exist.
Well, right, it's contextualized. What worked there may not work for you. You need to abstract the best principles and then bring them over and remap them to what makes sense in your organization, and that's how we're going to do it. So you have to have those principles, and you have those examples, and then you start having the dialogue. And I think a lot of people just have trouble doing that. It's hard work, but that's what's got to happen.
Now, look, we're over time. We've got a bunch of great stuff there. I wanted to finish on a rallying call. Just by the way, I loved Pat's point. A third of people make things happen. Another third watch them happening. And the final third say, how did that happen? I think I love that, Pat.
Or what happened?
What just happened? Let's finish with Tanaz. Tanaz's got a very, very simple, very straightforward question. And it's 8:30 in Bangalore, and I feel for her. I'd love to just finish with her question. Why are the percentages of employee participation so low? So if you've got some sort of e-learning, why is employee participation so low? It's a very specific question, but Clark, 30 seconds of questions, 30 seconds to answer, and then we'll wrap up.
Sure. And people talk about the 99-1 rule where 1% are active and 10% are sometimes active and 90% lurk, but they get benefit from it. I think that actually you can get more, but the reason the participation is low is that people aren't finding value in the networks. And I think it's those instances of if you build it, it is good, and it's not. It needs to be facilitated to the point where it becomes self-sustaining. And I think lots of times people are just putting it in place and then looking at it and going, well, why isn't it happening? You have to do much more to make it work, and the organizations that do that are finding real value. There's a social cast white paper I helped co-author on finding value in enterprise social networks, and they have a series of white papers and case studies where people are finding real value in the network, but it's not by chance.
I would say, if you want an example of a reasonably good network, join the Learning and Skills group, which is a great place to share thoughts with your colleagues and peers. And we have a good culture. It's very collaborative. We set it up quite deliberately at the beginning to be something where innovation and open sharing of thoughts is encouraged. Unfortunately, we have to stop there. It is 4 o'clock in the UK, as we know, 8:30 in Bangalore, and goodness knows if we just reached Clark's breakfast time now in California. I want to say thank you to him for a great presentation. Thank you to everybody in the audience. A top-notch bunch of participants today. We've really had some high-quality contributions, some great URLs, etc. If you've enjoyed it, please let the world know via hashtag LSG webinar on Twitter. And of course, yes, the recording, the web chat, the slides in PDF format will be available afterwards on learningandskillsgroup.com. Please do come along to that. And please do come along on the 5th of June. And we'll see you again at 10 o'clock and 12 o'clock, hopefully, for another 2 webinars from Learning and Skills Group. It's Learning at Work Day in the UK. If you've got an hour left in the UK, please learn something in the next hour. And let's just say, I hope we've all learned something today in this last hour. Thank you very much for helping me learn something new today. And Clark, thank you very much for a great presentation. I hope to see everybody on the 5th of June. And viva la rivoluzione!
Oui. Thanks. And I guess we're done. Typing there, Don. Oh, yeah. Now to the barricade. No, we're not defending. We're on the attack.